Our human gift of language gives us so many ways of engaging writing as a spiritual practice. I know many people who use morning pages as one form of writing as a spiritual practice, and that is simply getting up first thing in the morning and offering your first consciousness to the page, taking 15 to 20 minutes to just write out whatever comes, not worrying about form or content, just putting it down on the page and then moving on. This is a form of clearing out, and then making room for whatever else comes later on your page or in your activities. Another form of spiritual practice of writing tends to start with a line of poetry, or maybe a line of scripture, or even a headline from the newspaper, or some item from science or from history, or even an object, and a writing prompt. And this form of writing asks you to bring the experience of your life into an encounter with someone or something else, and then to see what comes of it. This is the kind of writing as a spiritual practice that we often engage here in our monthly writing sessions, one that I call Contemplative Correspondence. It is about noticing the relationship between things, between our own lived experience and that of someone else, between science and theology, between the past and the future, between our own perceptions and that of others. Because this is based on an encounter, it is about honoring both our similarities and our differences. Sometimes we bring these things together and they are very harmonic. They align in beautiful synchronicity. Other times we bring them together and there is conflict. There is difference in all of its beauty and its energy. Both of these are fruitful in our writing and in our spiritual practices because they teach us how to be in relationship, which is always about bridging difference of some kind or another. We live in a time and a culture that encourages us not to be in relationship across difference. And so this may be an especially rich time to engage contemplative correspondence for that kind of an encounter. Essentially, this encounter is one of hospitality, which is a matter of opening the door to someone else. Hospitality says, yes, come on in. The easiest forms of hospitality are those where we open the door to those who are most like us, those who maybe are most familiar, those whom we already know, we love and get along with. But the true essence of hospitality tells us that we are really practicing it when we learn how to open the door to those who are different. This includes not only other people, but to those parts of ourselves that are different, to those truths in ourselves that we may ordinarily try to keep at bay, those messages from our heart that we may be very practiced at closing the door to. And so in this sense, writing as a spiritual practice is a way of opening the door to our whole self, to listening to what is in our hearts on this day that we may not have heard before. We live in a world that is highly distracted from our heart's truth, and so it can be difficult to make time for this kind of listening to our own heart, of receiving all of its messages. But that is exactly what writing as a spiritual practice invites us to do. Long ago, Henry David Thoreau talked about how hard this was. In a day and age long before electronics, cell phones, social media, he wrote this about people who hadn't heard from themselves. And he was writing about this in a day when the post office sometimes had deliveries more than once a day. And so he writes this: "In proportion as our inward life fails, we go more constantly and desperately to the post office. You may depend on it that the poor fellow who walks away with the greatest number of letters, proud of his extensive correspondence, has not heard from himself in a very long while." That may have been true back in Thoreau's day. It's probably even more true in the day of cell phones, when our emails, our texts, our social media are constantly ringing and tapping on us and saying, "Hey, I've got a message for you. I've got another message from you." And very few of these messages will actually be from our heart. They are mostly from others. So writing as a spiritual practice invites you to set that aside for a short time and to listen to what your heart has to say today. Now, we know that we might not always welcome that. And so we can offer ourselves the basic hospitality of opening the door to our own heart's truth, knowing that this might help us practice hospitality to others with whom we find it hard to open the door. For this, I can't think of a better poem than Rumi's poem called The Guest House, which you may be familiar with, but it's a great example of a poem that helps us open the door and invite our own truth in. Here's how it goes. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whomever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from the beyond. What is your heart waiting to say to you today? Perhaps as a guide from the beyond or from the within, from the holy source of yourself. What might you learn if you listened to that voice, if you received that message today? To write about this today, I offer you this prompt and encourage you to write it down and follow wherever it leads, writing as long as you wish, and then sit back, maybe set it aside for a day, come back to it, and as you revisit it, ask yourself, what truth, what guidance is it offering you now? Here's the prompt. When I invite my own heart to speak, when I invite my own heart to speak, finish that sentence, keep writing wherever it leads you, and write as long as you wish. When I invite my own heart to speak. May your writing be fruitful. May your heart be open. Take good care.